Yeah, loud and clear.
All right, just a second. Yep.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Welcome back on the live. Let me just leave a comment um, what the session is about. All right. So welcome again, Niv. Let me just give a brief introduction to the viewers. So Nivendra is joining us again from Sri Lanka. It's lovely to have him back. He's a counseling psychologist, having his own practice in Sri Lanka, and he's been a part of a lot of wonderful mental health initiatives, and especially in the domain of suicide gatekeeper training, suicide prevention, awareness. And so since that is one of the topics that we would be discussing about eventually down in the month, we thought it would be a good idea just to start off with what depression actually is and then take it forward from there. So we have been running a couple of series and talks on the live, and a lot of them have sent in really very nice questions to clarify along the lines of depression, what it is not, rather.
Yeah.
And I think we would be also talking along the lines of self-diagnosis and all that in the session. So just as a brief to all our viewers here, how we started off was to try and differentiate depression itself from sadness, right? So sadness is a normal reaction to a life's disappointment, and it's usually short-lived, and it does not last after the trigger or the incident is no longer present, right? But depression is something which is long-lasting and it's pervasive, and you tend to see its influence across various domains of your life and functioning as well. And right now, the incidences for depression is quite on the rise. In fact, the age group between 15 and 44, research states, is the population that is most vulnerable. In fact, women are twice as likely to have an episode as compared to men. I think the ratio is about, say, one out of every four women would have had one episode, whereas 1 out of every 10 men generally go through an episode of depression. And right now we're going to go through a couple of the causes, most common causes, what makes a population at risk, and so on. So over to you, Nibendra, if you can just give us, just to start off with, what are the common causes or something which could trigger an episode of depression? If you can
Yeah.
just start discussing along those lines.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel, for having me on the live again. It's always a pleasure. And good evening to all of you. So, if you look at causes of depression, I think there are a couple of ways to understand this, right? So, one way is to look at the biology and the more genetic kind of a vulnerability that we might have as human beings, right? So some of us, because there might be a genetic vulnerability, because someone in our family may have had either depression or another mental health problem, or maybe in a few generations before us, there could have been undiagnosed depression. We don't know that always, right? Because in our cultures, this is something that we don't often see because it's invisible. So the diagnosis becomes difficult if you look at previous generations, because the conversation around this wasn't as intense as it is now, right? So okay, so there can be a genetic vulnerability, but the genetic vulnerability alone wouldn't cause depression. There will also have to be an environment around you that is also kind of difficult, or an environment that is not so supportive, that might then link together with the genetic vulnerability and put you at risk of developing depression or another mental health problem, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so that's the genetic part of it. And biologically also, because of certain changes in brain chemistry that happens, for we don't even know why it happens. There's not enough research to say what really happens in there, but we know that there's chemistry changes, especially in the neurotransmitter that we call serotonin, that is responsible for our mood, along with dopamine as well. So these two things tend to change, and there's so much other complex stuff going on that we don't have to get into, because I myself don't know much of it, right? But that is what happens. So that's the genetic and biological part of it. But also, when we talk about biology, we also have to say that there are lots of physical health issues or issues in our body that might also cause depression, right? So one of the most common things I find is thyroid related issues, right? So when there is a low level of thyroxine, what we call hypothyroidism, there is a chance that you can develop depression or have symptoms of depression, because they're very common with hypothyroidism, right? Then diabetes can bring about depression sometimes for a lot of people, right? And I think a lot of
has a strong link, right? The diet also sometimes can cause an onset, like foods which are high in sugar and fast foods. In fact, I think research shows that those who have a steady diet of fast food, they're more likely to develop depression or be vulnerable at least to it than those who survive on, say, vegetables and a healthy diet, therefore, right? So that also kind of gives us an idea about which countries or which population are more vulnerable, also depending on the diet. So I think what Navendra and I are also emphasizing on, it doesn't mean that there is a cause and direct effect, right? Just because you eat a certain food, or just because you have a person in the family who has depression, doesn't imply that you are definitely going to also have an episode. But you are more vulnerable than the populations which do not have these risk factors. And we also have the effect of certain types of medication, like the use of steroids has been known to create a vulnerability to develop depression. It can also be the personality of a personality itself. If you are somebody who generally has low self-esteem and you respond quite poorly to criticism or rejection, which is a part of your personality itself, then you are likely to be more vulnerable towards developing an episode. And also, socio-cultural factors, like the Navendra spoke about, the environment, right? So along with an additional vulnerability, there has to be a trigger. And in the case of an environment, it could be, say, financial crisis or failure, the loss of someone who is close to you. So these are instances in your immediate environment which can also create that vulnerability or cause you to have an episode of depression. Is there anything else, Navendra, that I didn't cover?
Just to add on to the physical health issues about thyroid issues, and you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So apart from thyroid issues and diabetes, there can also be, I think a lot of women go through polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, and PCOS has a strong link with depression, right? So that is something we have to think about. And then nutritionally, you mentioned food. So I think anemia has also a lot to do with depression, and especially in the cultures we come from, we find anemia quite prevalent, right? And at least in the last couple of years, we've seen anemia, but now I know that it's not as prevalent as it used to be. Vitamin D deficiencies can sometimes cause, so there's a whole range of things, right? But I think overall, I think another very important factor is alcohol and other substances or drugs, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people believe that alcohol is actually a stimulant because it gets us all high and happy and tipsy and all of that. So I must put a small disclaimer here. This is not to say don't drink or alcohol is bad. That's not what we are trying to say. But what we're trying to say is that alcohol is actually a depressant, right? So what it does is it depresses your central nervous system, and therefore your mood, once alcohol starts to crash, your mood also starts to crash after the high. So that is, if you're having depression, alcohol is one of those things that will always maintain it, right? So it's something we have to really think about a lot. But also, I think if you go back to childhood experiences and trauma, right, being exposed to trauma very early on in life, especially not having those very core kind of emotional needs met, right, by your caregivers. So if not having that sense of predictability, not having that sense of safety and security in your immediate family environment, being maybe subject to abuse or neglect or maltreatment as a child, can have a very strong link with you developing depression as an adolescent or as an adult, right? So that angle of things also we need to think about. And I think if there are students who are watching the session today, I think one of those very, very important things is sleep, right? Because when we don't sleep enough, when we don't get adequate sleep, that has a very, very kind of a, it is a high risk factor for someone to develop depression. And I remember when I was doing my master's and it was the dissertation time, there were lots of people, including me, who I felt my mood was dropping day by day because I was surviving on junk food, Red Bull, and a lack of sleep, right? So yeah, I mean,
So
at
it's
that
not
time,
just
yeah,
mood which can impact your biological cycles, but
yeah,
also a change or disrupted biological cycle can also cause or influence the onset of depression. This also, I think, when we have the seasonal affective disorder, right, where
yeah,
in countries where there is less sunlight, and when you shift between day and night shift routines, when there's a drastic change in your sleep cycles, your biological cycles, also it can cause the hormonal
yeah,
imbalance, cause neurotransmitter imbalance, chemical imbalance in your body. That can again trigger an episode. So it's a whole combination of both genetic, cultural, biological, personality variables which is involved
yeah,
here, which
yeah,
can make you vulnerable. Again, the stress is on you acquiring a vulnerability, not directly the illness itself, right? So let's just move on to what depression itself actually is. We have spoken about it, saying that it's a it's probably overspoken about, saying that it
yeah,
is a mental health concern. We also have people who use it, in layman terms on an everyday basis, saying that, oh my God, I have this assignment, I'm depressed, I'm stuck in traffic for 2 hours, I'm depressed. So there is a difference between what is actual clinical depression, which will require more a detailed intervention, as opposed to sadness or irritation or momentary frustrations that you can go through from a day-to-day basis. So some of the symptoms that we do tend to see in depression would be feelings of helplessness or hopelessness. It could be difficulty in focus, concentration, disrupted sleep patterns, lowering of your appetite, which might be reflected in you losing weight. And
yeah,
then there's also a loss of control over different aspects or elements of your life. There could be increased irritability, frequent episodes of anger, which you're not able to explain as to why it happens. And there could be crying spells as well, which again could even come up in the absence of a trigger, right? So you could just be spending time watching your favorite series on, the television, but then you could just start tearing up,
yeah.
right? And these are some of the signs that you would probably have to watch out for, right? What else, Niv, can you add to that?
I think one of the two most important things to watch out for is the lack of or the loss of interest in things that you like to do before that you don't feel like doing anymore, and the loss of energy. Not having, even though you're not doing anything, just still feeling really exhausted and tired. And Rachel, sometimes the loss of appetite and the difficulty to sleep can be the other way around as well, where people
Yes.
eat unusually large amounts of food
Mhm.
as a way of soothing themselves when they're feeling low. And also some people sleep excessive amounts of
Yes.
hours.
Yes.
We call that hypersomnia, right? So that's, it can work the other way around as well, right?
Mhm.
Especially people tend to go for sugary stuff, carbohydrates,
Mhm.
stuff like that when they are depressed, because the sugar tends to give you temporary energy boosts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and even things like coffee, Red Bull, all of that stuff, people tend to kind of use it excessively sometimes. But on the
Okay.
other hand, people can also lose their appetite. And I think another important factor is that India, Sri Lanka, and a lot of other Southeast Asian cultures, we are very good at talking about feelings and emotions, and we are amazing at emotional literacy. And because we are so amazing at emotional literacy, sometimes depression comes out as very bodily symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people will come and tell you, I have headaches all the time, my shoulders ache all the time, the lower back aches all the time, got gastritis that is really bothering me, or the soles of my feet are burning, right? So those are some of the common things people come and tell you. When so it can be very bodily as well, because some of us don't have that sense of vocabulary and literacy to be able to recognize it as depression. And I think in the local languages in your country and mine, the words that we use for things like depression are very technical, which the common man doesn't really know, right? So a lot of the time they will go to a hospital or a doctor or someone and say, this hurts or that hurts, or I feel really lethargic, or I feel really heavy when I wake up in the morning. And usually, most of the time, depression also gets misdiagnosed for other physical health issues. So we just have to be aware of that as well when we talk about.
I think because physical symptoms are more observable, right? They're more observable, and they also tend to worry us more because they are observable, and they can be explained in the sense that if you have constant headaches, this is something which you might be used to, having a headache. You know what it is. You can label it as a headache, but there could be an underlying cause behind that. But it's the physical symptom actually which brings people initially for a consultation. Also, they would notice behavioral changes in their sleep routines, rather than their thought processes, for example, which just goes unnoticed or unlabeled or just pushed under the carpet. We had a question here, Niv, which I think I'll take up right now as we're talking about the causes. One of the questions which came up was, do we have to have a specific trigger in order to develop depression? What if there is no trigger and over a span of time, the mood generally just gets low and it gets worse? Is that possible? And could that also be depression?
I think that's a very important question. And to answer that, I have to say, no, you don't have to have a visible trigger all the time, but it can also be because of your thinking patterns. It can be because of your belief systems that you have that develop very early on in life, what we call core beliefs, right? So, for example, if someone develops that belief very early on in life, saying, I'm not good enough, or, I'm a bad person, I'm unlovable, or people don't like me, right? Or I got to be always extra nice for people to like me, because of various messages we have received since the time we've been an infant, right? So those beliefs sometimes lead our mood also to be low because of the thought processes that we have. So, and yes, sometimes that low mood can persist over time, right? And I mean, earlier we call this dysthymia, where there's a mild level of low mood, but you're able to function, right? But however, you will always have a persistent sense of being low. And now we call this persistent depressive disorder, PDD, right? Where usually we look at 2 years to diagnose this, right? And don't worry about the technical stuff. But what I'm trying to say is that it can happen. So you don't have to have a visible trigger. And this is what makes depression very misunderstood as well in our culture, because we believe that for everything there needs to be a specific cause or a specific thing you can identify. And a lot of caregivers, parents, or even medical professionals fail to understand that sometimes you can just wake up one day and feel really miserable for no apparent reason, and that can continue, right? So it's really, really important that we understand that there doesn't have to be a visible trigger.
Another time that I usually find clients undergoing a difficult period or a distressing mood is, a period of transitions, right? So when you are always protected by the structure of a school system or a college system or a family system, and then they move out of it, where they're no longer defined by the routines that are already in place, but now they are left to set routines all by themselves in the lack of that structure, maybe away or far away from that support that they've already had. That's when sometimes also the mood starts going downhill, when the earlier support systems are no longer there. So transition periods, it could also involve, it doesn't only have to be a negative transition, right? It can also be a positive transition, like I've had clients talk about promotions and they don't realize, they don't understand why they feel sad after a promotion, or a happy incident like getting married, and they don't understand why that onsets
Yeah.
a low mood phase, or even transfers between countries,
Of course.
where they go abroad for a job, and they want to, call their friends and say, hey, I'm in Dubai, I'm like experiencing life at its fullest, but they really don't feel it, and they don't understand why something really good, which someone
Yeah.
else would say is good, is something that they don't feel the same way about, right? So it
Exactly.
could also happen during periods of transitions. Then,
Yeah.
is there anything like any additional risk factors that you would say creates more of a red flag than the ones that we discussed about? For example, you mentioned something like abuse,
Yeah.
right? Childhood abuse. Is there anything else?
Um, so just to add to what you just said about transitions, another very interesting thing we've seen lately is that when people go on holidays to other countries, right? So let's, for example, people go to Maldives because wow, sun, sand, beach, all of that stuff. But sometimes that expectation that they have so high for a country when they go, and then that suddenly just crashes because it doesn't meet your expectations. Actually, there are instances where people develop very serious episodes of depression and other mental health issues that they need to be transferred back to their country. That has happened a lot in countries like mine in Maldives, when people come on holiday because they expect this very, the things that you see in the movies. So that's just an interesting fact. So yeah, other risk factors, I think I've seen a lot of emotional invalidation as a young person or as a child, and this lack of soothing from a caregiver
Okay.
that can leave people. That can, I think, I've seen that being a risk factor for depression, but other serious mental health problems as well.
Okay.
For example, simple things like when a child has, let's say, fallen while playing when they were really young, and being told to just get up, get on with it, you're not supposed to cry, etc., etc. So those messages, people carry them right into adulthood, right? And it affects people. So I think that's a risk factor to consider. And also bullying, right? It could be different types of bullying people experience in school or even in university sometimes, in the form of ragging, right? Which we've seen happen. Um, yeah, and I think having very critical and punitive parents, right, who are, and all being compared to other people all the time as a young person, I think all of that can lead to someone sometimes developing depression. Not everyone. There are people who have had quite difficult childhoods who are able to live, a meaningful life without having a diagnosed mental illness. But I think, strangely enough, I think being a man also puts you at risk of developing depression, but we don't recognize it as so much as we
And
might
talk
to
about it either,
talk
right?
about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's often masked as anger, or it's masked as just being this, macho type of guy. But if you really look at it, there are so many men who struggle silently with depression and other mental illnesses just because of the fact that there's so much of expectation from society to be
Okay.
strong and masculine and all of that. So I mean, it's not a surprise that male suicides top the charts around the world, right? We have high male suicide rates, and one of the causes for that is undiagnosed depression.
Okay.
Uh, and that has a strong link with suicide, especially in men. So, yeah, that's something we also have to really address and talk about. Yeah. So, those
So
are some.
when this does come up, right? So when people start to observe either in themselves or in others
Yeah.
that all of these concerns are going on, right? The feelings of helplessness, changes in their biological cycles, and loss of control, and maybe somatic physical symptoms which are starting to disturb them. So they start to notice these changes. What do you think, or else let's take the opportunities available. So what are the treatments that are currently available? What is the way forward for them? What are the options which are available?
Okay. So I want to really highlight the fact that depression is treatable. Okay, it is not something that is a life sentence or that you have to live with for the rest of your life. You can be treated and you can live a very meaningful and fruitful life after you recover. Or even people who might have more chronic depressive kind of illness, they can also live very meaningful life with the proper treatment and proper support, right? So when we say treatment, it's not just the treatment that you get from a doctor or a psychologist, but it's also support from your family, your community, being involved in activities. So all of that comes together to promote recovery. So, okay, what are the options available for treatment? I think I would really say that it's very important to start with seeing a psychologist who can assess you and then diagnose you if they are able to do so, especially if it's a clinical psychologist in India, right? They are able to diagnose you if they think you are depressed, and if they also believe and you believe collaboratively together that you can also benefit from some sort of medical assistance, then they would refer you to the relevant psychiatrist for that as well. So I would really say that let's not rush into going to see a doctor first, because sometimes depression can also be treated only with psychotherapy. You don't always need
Yes.
medication, right? This is not to say medication is bad, don't do it. That's not what we are trying to say. And I'm not promoting psychology just because I'm a psychologist, but what I'm saying is that it's very important to first understand what's going on for you, to have a lengthy conversation with a psychologist or a counselor for that matter, right? And then proceed from there if you think you can benefit from some sort of pharmacological intervention as well. There are times medication helps, there are times it's necessary, there are times it does wonders for people, right? To help them recover, but it's a decision that a person and the psychologist or whoever needs to make together. And then research has shown us over and over that therapy and medication together has a very, very good outcome for depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues. Yeah. And also then develop a
Are
good
the
support.
possible, like, what could be some of the reasons that, like, a lot of times when we as psychologists feel the need for medication with a client, and there are also there's a lot of stigma against using medication
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
mental illnesses or emotional distress, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stigma attached to that. There's a lot of, you know, um, the kind of information that people get may not
Yeah.
be the right information as well. So just to talk along those lines, like again, like Niv and I said, we are not supporting one over the other. It's just that certain and certain occasions, like for example, when there's a higher risk
Yeah.
involved,
Yeah.
right, like a harm to yourself or harm to people around you, the severity, and if a person has already gone through something for a long period of time and there's a lot of acting out behaviors, you feel a lot of aggression that you're not able to control, suicidal thoughts. I think one
Yeah.
of the things that we didn't cover in under the symptoms of depression is suicidal ideations or suicidal thoughts, thoughts relating to why am I even alive? Life would be better if I'm not there. People would be happy if I'm not there. The world would be a better place if I'm not there. So this
Yeah.
is something which is also quite evident in more severe cases of depression. So in these instances, we know that this is all just it's momentary. It's a phasic. It's a phase, and given the right help, the people would be able to come or get back on track. So in these instances, medication is sought after. Again, like Niv said, it's not the only option which is out there, and research has shown that medication plus therapy side by side does wonders. Therapy alone has a lot of benefits. So Niv, as a psychologist and with given your experience, could you talk something along the lines of what therapy or how therapy actually works? So what do we do for individuals who have depression?
Okay. Um, so I think for me, and I think world over, one of the most kind of types of psychotherapy that has the most evidence for depression is cognitive behavior therapy, or what we call CBT, right? I mean, that's the most commonly kind of used method or technique, or what not a technique, but a more of a type of therapy to treat depression. It works for mild depression, it can work for moderate depression, and along with medication, it can also really help with severe depression as well, right? So what I tend to do with people is when they come and then we diagnose or we understand that there might be depression going on, is after an assessment, first thing I would really focus on is getting them activated, right? So we call this behavioral activation, because one of the things that tends to happen first is that you start to lose interest in things that you normally do and your activity levels go down, right? So what we do is gradually start to build up the activity levels again, getting them into sort of a schedule, right? And I think one of the things I advocate for very strongly is physical exercise, right? As a part of therapy, because it actually does so much of good for people who are going, not just depression, but with any mental health issue, right? Exercise doesn't have to be, going to a gym and really just completely exhausting yourself, but it can just be a 30-minute brisk walk that you do. And that done regularly can really benefit someone. So and then finding hobbies that someone can get involved in, and where they can also meet other people, because isolation is something that tends to happen with depression as well. So once behaviorally they become activated and they start to develop some sort of a routine, start to engage in things, then you start to work with the more thinking processes or the thinking patterns, trying to identify what kind of thoughts they have that might lead to them feeling low, and then trying to work around those things to see whether people can develop alternative or more balanced way of thinking about things. And then you would go deeper into other things after that as well. So CBT is not the only way. There are other ways to treat depression, but commonly I have found that there's been a lot of results from using CBT. So when you see a psychologist, it's very important to find out whether they have had adequate training in things like CBT if they are treating you for depression.
So we have medication as one of the options. There's also therapy. There's a combination of both, and we also at times with mild forms of depression, sometimes even lifestyle changes and just working and readjusting your coping skills would suffice. So a lot of times what happens is people, when they come across new situations, like we spoke about transition stages, right? So what happens is they try their usual regular method of coping and that doesn't work, and they try it 10 times over, it still doesn't work. There's building frustration, and you keep trying a couple more times with your tried and true methods of functioning, and when that also fails, that's when you feel like you've hit rock bottom. So often meeting with a therapist or a psychologist can also help you get a new perspective, fresh new perspective at looking at this problem or the stressor that you're actually going through, right? And talking about medication also, it's not something that definitely not something that as soon as you go to a psychiatrist that they put you on for a lifelong basis, right? You have constant connect with both your psychiatrist as well as your psychologist, who will assess you at regular intervals to see what your progress is. And a lot of times, I've had a lot of clients where, say, medication was just for a very brief period of time, after which there was therapy, and then the persons could just continue with the skills that they gained from therapy. So what is best for you is something that you could determine while working with your mental health professional, right? Niv, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So when do you feel, Niv, when does a person have to seek help, right? What are at what points in time, when does a person decide, okay, I need to get help?
I think it's about also the time period, right? Because like we said, to diagnose depression, we say that the feeling low and all those other symptoms, they have to persist for a time period. So usually we look at about 2 weeks, right? So I think if you notice yourself feeling low or feeling irritable or feeling sad for an extended period of time, not just 1 or 2 days, but continuously for a period of time, that would be an indicator that you might need to seek help.
Mhm.
If you're having thoughts about suicide, or if you're having thoughts about self-harm, if you're finding yourself using alcohol excessively, right? Or if you find yourself, for example, not sleeping well for a period of time. So those are some indicators that you might want to reach out to someone. So remember that a lot of the time in our societies, we say that depression is not a big deal. It's not something to worry about, or it's not as serious as we make it out to be, or it's just a phase, it'll pass, don't worry about it, just chill. So all of these things we say, but they are not very helpful all the time, right? So please remember that whatever you're feeling, if you're feeling depressed, is valid, and there's nothing shameful about feeling those things. But the good thing is that there is treatment, and I think you guys are way luckier and fortunate in India, because you have access to help much easier than you would have it in where I live, right? So please don't be ashamed to seek help, because depression is something that the earlier it is diagnosed and treated, the good outcome, a better outcome that you can have in terms of recovery and living your life in a meaningful manner. Yeah.
Mhm. And so just before we wind up, Niv, what are some of the things, like let's say we recognize some of the signs in a friend or a family member, right? What are some of the things that we can say, or how best we could intervene during that time?
Okay. So to answer this question, I often talk about, I'm sure most of you guys have watched Winnie the Pooh, or read the book Winnie the Pooh. Yeah. So in Winnie the Pooh, there is Eeyore, the donkey, right? And Eeyore is someone who is clinically depressed, right? But what you see over and over again is that Pooh, Tigger, and Piglet, they all always make sure that Eeyore is included in the activities. Eeyore is not isolated, and they tell Eeyore that he's not alone. And even if Eeyore says, I don't want to do anything, or I don't want to talk to you guys today, they say, okay, but we'll sit with you in silence and we'll just wait. So I think Winnie the Pooh is a very, very powerful example of how we should support our friends and family members who might live with depression. So my partner lives with depression. She's been living with depression for the past 4 years. So in supporting her, it's been a huge learning process, because I've also done my fair share of mistakes, said things I shouldn't have said. But you learn as you go along. So please don't feel pressured to be the perfect caregiver or the perfect friend, because it's difficult, because it's not as easy as treating or helping someone who might have a physical health issue, because that is more visible, right? And depression is something that's dynamic. It changes from time to time. So I think the most important thing is to let them know that they are not alone. Yeah. But not to force your help on them either, right? Not to pressurize them to talk all the time or to tell you what's going on, but to just consistently, gently remind them that you're there for them to talk to or to reach out to if they want to, and to check in on them regularly. So it can be as simple as maybe inviting them over to yours for a cup of tea, or it can be meeting them somewhere to go for a walk. So it doesn't have to be sophisticated things. It can be simple things that people find very helpful. So checking in on someone regularly, keeping in touch, and not invalidating their feelings. So not saying things like snap out of it, or, why are you being such a, I don't know, loser? Sometimes people hear that, right? Or why are you being so
a lot of patience in dealing with a person, and not to probably take something, let's say they are having a fit of rage, they could be really angry and they say something, not to take it personally, but understand that it's part of the entire presentation. They're not able to help it, right? And first, it is important that you understand. So Niv talked about the importance of listening, something which people find very hard to do. They immediately shift into this advice giving phase, where they feel simple things like, take a walk or sleep on it, or everything will be okay. I think that's something as psychologists we have been told over and over again not to say, right? That things would be okay.
Yeah.
And so to understand their symptoms, and to be observant, learn to recognize the symptoms. And sometimes it's okay to put it forward in the form of a check and ask a person, saying that this is something that you used to enjoy doing
Yeah.
before,
Mm.
and that seems to have changed. Is there something that's bothering you? Is there
Yeah.
something that's worrying you? Would you like to talk about it? But not to push and not
Yeah.
to pressurize, but being
Yeah.
observant and patient,
And
right?
I think rather than saying, snap out of it, or come on, you can do this, why are you being so weak, blah, 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 but you can ask, what can I do to help, or how can I be of help, right? So those questions are very useful to ask. And to just also, involve them in your activities, involve them in activities that happen in your community, right? So all of that can go a long way in helping someone recover from depression. Yeah.
And genuine concern, right? Not just post concern, but genuinely be concerned. In fact, I think because one of the symptoms also is a lack of motivation, right? So they are not also motivated at that point to do something to change how
Yeah.
they feel,
Yeah.
right? So that's where we try and involve them as much as possible, and maybe even do the footwork of trying to find a mental health professional, talking about it. I've had a lot of people becoming more open towards talking about the symptoms, even just because of these lives, which I'm really happy about. That if there are various resources, like you said, Nif, you just have to look around. There are
Yeah.
people that you can talk to, and even though you feel at your lowest, there is a way out. It's just a phase, right? There are helpline numbers that are available, forums where you could get a person to respond to your query about how you are feeling, to validate, to give you that validation that you're looking
Yeah,
for.
I think with technology, there are also a lot of apps on your smartphone that you can use to support yourselves.
Yeah.
There are two apps that I often recommend to people. One is called Woebot, that's WOEBOT, which is an app heavily based on cognitive behavior therapy that people can use to kind of work with their thoughts when they're feeling low or depressed. So Woebot is one. And there's another chatbot called Wysa, that's WYSA. So both those apps are available. You can download them and use them. They're very helpful. And please educate yourself. That's very important. Read up, but read up factual stuff, and because there's a lot of inaccurate information as well on the internet. There are a couple of good books on depression. You can just Google them and find them. So please read up, educate yourself, and I think that's also a very positive way to be able to support other people. The more you know about the illness, the more you can support people.
Yeah. So just to summarize, so this is definitely, this condition is something which is treatable. Help is available in various formats, and support, being a patient listener, showing genuine concern is something that you could do for someone you notice going through a rough time. I think we had a couple of questions on intervention with respect to suicide as well, which we are doing in another 2 weeks on the live. Okay, we can take one question maybe. Does overuse of mobile phones create depression? Right?
Yeah, it
Social
does.
media and mental health. We've had a session already, so I'd probably direct Jesse. You could just check out that resource as well. When it comes to mobile phone use, social media use, it depends on what you're doing with the mobile. You could probably be just using it to just write up notes for the day, or even on social media, or watching videos. The content, I think, matters
Yeah.
more than the duration of mobile phone usage. But also, I think some of the takeaways from the session that Niv mentioned is the don'ts, right? Not to just come up to a person and say that it would be okay, or think positive thoughts, you will start to
Yeah.
feel better. It's like at a period where they just can't relate to a single positive thought, a suggestion would not make a difference. Rather, include them, understand what they're going to, try and understand what they're going through, and try and connect them to a mental health professional. And also the importance of not self-diagnosing. I know we ran you through a couple of symptoms that you would probably be like, hey, I have all of this, doesn't mean that I have depression, right? Do not self-diagnose, do not diagnose based on Google
And do
or your
not
friend.
self-medicate.
Yes, no self-medication. Alcohol is not a good coping strategy for depression. It's actually a depressant. So when you have all of these symptoms, the first thing is try and talk to someone about it, a professional. There are forums, helplines, apps available. I'll put out a couple of them as a post as well, so you could have access. And definitely the diagnosis has to take place only with a mental health professional, either a psychiatrist, a clinical psychologist, that you could go to, so that it's done in the appropriate manner. Right? Thank you so much, Niv, for joining us today. It was wonderful having you. Hope to see you again in another 2 weeks for the Suicide Gatekeeper training. Thank you so much to our viewers as well for joining us today. The video will be up in a couple of hours on YouTube, and you could watch it for those of you who joined in late.
Oh, on YouTube. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I'll put out the link. Thank you so much, Niv. Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening. Cheers.
Okay.